Welcome back to Sprague or Homestead. So today I'm going to kind of show you how to build your own wooden nest boxes for your rabbits. Now I've built a couple of different styles over the last few years, and so I'll kind of show you the ones I started with to where I am now and kind of tell you exactly how it's evolved and things I do and don't like about the old ones. So some of the first nest boxes were made simply of plywood, kind of a thin plywood, and these have been sitting outside so you can kind of see that they've gotten snowed on like everything else right now. So the things I don't like about these, the size were good. The thing that happens is, of course, you can see rabbits chew the bejeebers out of everything. So they don't hold up real well. The other thing is that the plywood is so thin that you get a lot of nails. I'll just kind of show you here, where they've stripped off a piece of the plywood. Now I've got exposed nails. So they don't hold up quite as well. They were pretty cheap to make because I had some leftover plywood laying around. And then, of course, they're solid bottomed. And the way that they've got these things nailed in, or the way I've got it nailed in, is you can't really get the bottom off to replace it. So if it gets really, really nasty, I like to just take them off, toss them in the burn pile, and then, put a new piece on. Can't really do that because of the way the front end actually overlaps this bottom piece. The other thing is that for the bigger does, they're really lightweight, and I've got a couple of girls that like to throw them around. So it didn't really work all that well. So then I went to a different one to try and stop the throwing problem. And I made some of these for the Harlequins as well. This isn't actually for one of the Americans. You can see it's a pretty big box. So I went with all 1x. Now the nice thing is they're very, very heavy duty. You get some chew marks, but not as bad as what happened with the plywood. Nails hold in there real, real well. I did change the bottoms to where it's one piece, but I also went with plywood on the bottom, like a heavier plywood. Because again, I was just pulling out of the scrap pile. They're very, very, very heavy. It's good for the does because they can't get them out and can't move around a whole lot. But when you're trying to reach in to grab a hold of these things to pull them out, either to pull them out at the end of their time in there or just to check on the litters, they're so freaking heavy. And I didn't really like that. Especially this summer when I was on a weight restriction as far as lifting, and I just couldn't, it was just too much to get in there and try and get them out. So I decided that this was not necessarily the way to go. I also don't like that the bottom were solid. I don't get enough airflow in there, in my opinion. So I think I have come up with, at least for me, the best nest box. So this little jewel is a smaller one than I use for my smaller Harlequins and for my Triantas. It's 14 inches long, so it is a stumpy little thing. There's still a top on it, but it's not huge, so you don't get does hanging out on top as much. What I did that's so different, so it's got 1x's on the side because this is where they chew the most. So it's most durable where you get the most chewing. It also, because it's wider here, it gives me lots of room to nail in the plywood, which means if I've got to replace some of this, I'm not worried about going back into the same holes. I'm not worried about splitting stuff. So basically the sides are 1x's. We've got a piece of plywood on the front, on the top, and on the back, and on the bottom, pegboard. Now, the thing I like about pegboard is it's good for any time of the year. It's got good airflow. It's got good drainage. I've had people tell me, oh, you don't want to use that in the winter. We were down to 5 degrees this last week, and I do actually have a Trianta in our tent area. It's not a true building. It's just a carport tent. And I was a little worried because she's got 5 babies in there. They were only a couple days old. Ran outside because it wasn't supposed to be that cold. Went out that morning, checked. They're fine. It's not bothering them at all. They've got good insulation. Mom built them a nice little nest in there. But I've got good holes to where dust and particulates and that sort of thing is coming through. So I should have, this is my first year using them, I should have less chances of respiratory issues or nest box eye. Now I don't get much of that anyway. But anytime you can minimize your risk of something, you're far better off. The other thing is, I nailed them through the bottom. So because it's only pegboard, I wouldn't imagine I'm going to get more than one season out of them. I can just take a hammer to the inside, knock them out, cut a new piece, and put it on there. That works for me because I have a huge pile of pegboard out in the barn that we bought for another project. A guy gave us like 80 sheets for like 40 bucks. So we've got more pegboard than we know what to do with. So it works really good for me. It gives me something to use it up. You can actually take pegboard and soak it in, I want to say it's linseed oil, and it'll get nice and hard and durable for like pretty much ever. I'm going to try that this summer, but I haven't tried it yet. So this is what I'm going to be showing you how to make today. Okay, so to build your nest boxes, I'm using a 1 by 10 inch board, which is actually a little closer to like 9.5 inches. And I like to buy them in 6-foot lengths. If you're building a whole bunch of them, you might want to buy 8-footers. But depending on how big of a box I'm going to be building, I can get at least 2 or 2.5 boxes out of just one piece. On some of the shorter Trianta boxes, sometimes I'll even get 3. It just kind of depends on how it goes. So you'll need a couple of boards. You're going to need some plywood. I think what I've got is either a quarter or half. It's got to be a quarter because it's pretty thin. So any size plywood, it doesn't really matter, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then something for the bottom. If you don't want to put pegboard in, you can just use plywood. For tools, you're just going to need a tape measure and a pencil or a marker. Some kind of saw to cut with. I have a little cordless skill saw. And then some way to assemble them. You can use screws if you want. If you're going to use screws, I would always recommend drilling pilot holes because this 1 by tends to be pretty brittle. I, however, cheat and use an air gun, so or a battery gun. It's just a brad nailer. You can get a brad stapler. If you prefer a staple gun, you can do that, like a crown staple, the very, very tiny ones. And I go with pretty short nails. I like the 1-inchers. You tend to get less blow through in case you hit a knot or something that you can't see. You don't get as much blow through the side, less things to cut and pry and make sure that are smooth for the rabbit. So that's pretty much it. And you'll need something for a straight edge to draw your lines with. I usually just use an extra piece of whatever laying around because it's only bunny boxes. It's not surgery. So let's go ahead and get started measuring. Okay, so I'm going to be making 16-inch boxes. These are for my Harlequins that go up to about 9.5 pounds. So if you're doing a bigger rabbit, you may even want to go up to an 18-inch. But what I like is a 6-inch back piece. I don't want my does hanging out on top a whole lot. It's just to give them a nice warm shelter in the back if they decide that they need it. So that's going to be that piece there. I'm going to go 16 inches here. And I'm going to go 16 inches somewhere around there. And I like a 3.5-inch lip on the front. Now you can go a little higher if you want. I've never really seen any benefit to it. Okay, I think you can see all of that there. Alright, and then it's just a matter of connect the dots kind of thing. So taking your straight edge, alright, and actually this line for this first one, I'm going to make go all the way to the front, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, so you can kind of see here that I've got it all marked out. Now, with the first one, I go ahead and mark this first one out and cut the piece out, and then use this as my template. It just saves me a lot of time going through and measuring and doing all the math on it. So what you want to do when you cut the long piece there and then cut this little piece off here. So let's go ahead and get that done. Alright, so there is your very first side of a nest box. Okay, so to do my next one, to make this nice and quick, what you do is you just go up and line that thing up best you can. And that's somewhere. You'll find that these cuts, especially if you got them pretty straight, will kind of match up to themselves. And then you're just going to mark your front and your back. And then because generally if you're going to make these, you end up making more than one. At least I do. I flip it over and go ahead and mark my next couple pieces. And just go ahead and mark them all before you start sewing again. And you just kind of do your best because, of course, if you're buying your lumber at somewhere like Home Depot, like we have to, it's very seldom straight, level, even, whatever you want to call it. You tend to get a little bow to your boards. Oops, and I forgot the back. Alright, so that is enough for now 2 nest boxes. And I'm just a skosh short to do another piece to make an extra half for another box. Probably what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and measure it down and make one for another 14, and I'll just make an extra tree on the box. So if you've got an 8-foot piece, you should be able to get at least another set out of there. And let's go ahead and get these cut out. Okay, so next we're going to cut out or lay out our parts for the front, top, and back. Now I like to keep mine pretty simple. I go with 10 inches wide. I know that's pretty wide to most people. That is the way I like to do mine. So I go ahead and lay out a 10-inch strip out of my plywood. And all I'm using is a 2-foot by 4-foot piece of plywood that I had bought for another project and still had laying around. Alright, so the front end, we know we're going to be at 3.5 inches. Because that's what we laid out the front end with the other box on. And then we know we're at 6 inches for the top. So that will put us up to 9.5. So to do the back, you're going to have to kind of measure and see what kind of variance your boards have. I checked mine. It looks like I'm going to need about 9.25. So that is going to put us up to 18.75. Alright. And then I'm just going to mark across, cut the whole thing off, and go. Alright, so once we're done, we are looking at a 10-inch by 3.5, a 6 by 10, and a 10 by roughly 9.25. Okay, now to assemble your boxes, I like to kind of lay mine up. I start with the front, and this one's got a sticker. Oh, so it's 3/8 plywood. Let's see here. If you've got stickers on, you might want to take them off. Rabbits are funny. They'll want to worry them off of there. Get that later. Alright, so I use that other one just as kind of a stand. We go ahead and we line it up in the front. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, these are just for the rabbits, and Lord knows they're going to chew them up anyway. So kind of get them on there. Alright. I like to do at least 3 nails in mine. It doesn't really matter. That one's got a screwy piece in it, so I did 4. And then once that's kind of on there, it's a little bit easier to get the next piece. Just keep in mind you'll have to lift up a little bit if you're using an unstable table like I am. Alright. Certainly don't have to do the fronts. This is just the way I do them first. Okay. So once we've got our front nailed on, turn mine around and I do the backs. And because I like to nail my top down to this back piece a little bit, if you're off, just kind of cheat up. Now, if you're using very long nails, don't put your finger on top. Because I've had them come out and go wild and up through my finger. Alright. And then usually what happens is they flex a little bit. So you'll have to kind of flex back up. And I'll usually put the top nail in. Like this one's twisted just a touch. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull it down like that. Whenever possible, try not to nail towards your hand. I do all the time, and only taking a nail or two to the fingers. Alright, so once that's on, now it's time for the top. Now you may have to adjust this if these are a little out of square. What I usually do is start with my back corner and kind of go from there. You can see they're just slightly off. Usually flex them into place. Put a couple nails in to hold it, and then check the other side. Looks pretty good. Alright. Now if you're using plywood and a nail gun and you feel pretty confident that you can hit that little bit of plywood, you certainly can. I usually do, just to make sure that I've got an extra nail in there. But you do want to make sure and check that you didn't get any blow through. And it looks like I'm okay. Alright, now let's talk about doing the bottom. Alright, so with your piece of pegboard, you can kind of do it however you want. I tend to, in case there's any variances in how the box went, I actually will put the box on and just trace around it and cut it out. But you can measure it too. Pegboard, at least most of the good pegboard, has this kind of flimsy side, and then it's much harder on the white side. You can kind of hear that, I think it's melamine on the one side. So I put this to the inside of the box. If this side gets wet, Joe's can just go right through it, and it tends to get pretty ugly pretty quick. But so to do it, you just turn your box over, get any snow and ice off. Winter building. So you're going to put the brown side up, and then I just go ahead and kind of see how we're doing, make sure we're a pretty good fit, and then I'll nail off to one side and kind of square from there. So, and again, how many nails you put in is entirely up to you. Knowing that I might take these back off at some point, I usually go at least 5. Okay, turn that around. Alright, pretty squared off there. Yeah. Alright, and then I like to do one in the middle just for good measure. Kind of holds it all together. Keeps you from getting less flex. And that is front and back. Alright, and then, especially if you use the nail gun, you go back through and you just look for nails. And you can kind of see, I did have one that I missed. It's kind of hard with these little 18 gauge brad nails to get them clipped, but they're pretty thin. You can usually snap them off. If they're just barely out, you can just hit them with a hammer and usually they'll bend off enough. Alright, and once that's done, everything's good, you are finished, ready to use your new nest box. So I pretty much use the same 10-inch width for everybody, my Triantas, my Harlequins, and my Americans. Now with the Americans, I do have a couple girls that are extra large that sit closer to 14 and 15 pounds full grown. I do have a couple of bigger boxes, kind of like those heavy wood ones we were talking about earlier, that I do go 12 inches just to give them a little bit more room. but generally everybody's going to fit nothing more than a 10. I've used 10-inch wide boxes even for New Zealand. You should be fine. The thing to remember when you're trying to size a nest box is you want the doe to be able to come in and stand corner to corner all the way through it. And the reason for that is when does nurse, they typically go in nose first, nose to the back of the box, and they tend to put a foot in each corner of the box to spread themselves wide enough for the babies to nurse. Some does are a little bit different. I've got 2 does that actually go in and turn around. I guess they don't like to have their nose in the box, but that's generally how you try and figure out the size of the box. Now, because I raise several different breeds, I like to have boxes that are pretty multifunctional. So I build my American boxes big, but not so big that my biggest Harlequins can't use them. And when I'm building the 14-inch Trianta boxes, they're still big enough for some of my smaller Harlequins. So I like to have a good, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to have too many specialized boxes unless you're doing Netherland Dwarves and Flemish Giants. Then I guess you probably all have 2 different size boxes. But whenever you can reuse stuff on the farm, that's always good. Now, with this, because I've had some of this stuff in storage, the last thing I'm going to do is it's just going to get a little bleach water solution, let it sit out here in the sun, what little there is, to dry, to disinfect, because you just don't know what's been running around on that lumber, and that's it. So if you have questions on any of this, go ahead and leave it down in the comments. Remember, they're just nest boxes. You're giving your doe a nice place to go. It's not rocket science. They don't have to be beautiful. Don't be afraid to use wood that's dirty, scarred, whatever. Do try and stay away from anything that's been chemically treated. If you use plywood, just stay away from anything that's pressure treated and that kind of thing. So that's it today from Sprague Homestead. Happy homesteading and good luck with your rabbits.